Good morning to all. Myself, Dr. Vijayakumar, Professor of Physiology. Today I am going to take the topic cerebellum. Cerebellum is a major part of the brain which is responsible for maintenance of muscle tone, posture, equilibrium. Cerebellum consists of several parts and which is backside of the brain, so that it is called hindbrain, and it is located in the posterior cranial fossa behind the pons and medulla, attached to the brainstem by the three cerebellar peduncle. They are known as superior cerebellum, also called brachium conjunctivum, and middle cerebellum, also known as brachium pontis, and inferior cerebellum, also known as restiform body. That cerebellum is classified into three major classifications under the anatomical specifications are known as anterior lobe, posterior lobe, and flacculo-nodular lobe. This picture shows the anatomical classification of the cerebellum. The upper part is with this yellow color is anterior lobe, and the center part is with green color is also known as posterior lobe, and the last one, tail part of the cerebellum, also called flacculo-nodular lobe by the anatomical classification. And functional classifications are three. They are known as vestibulocerebellum and spinocerebellum, cerebrocerebellum. And phylogenetically, these cerebellum further divides into three classifications are known as archicerebellum, paleocerebellum, and neocerebellum. The topmost part is also called spinocerebellum, and the center is also called cerebrocerebellum. The flacculo-nodular lobe is also called vestibulocerebellum. Now, summarizing all this classification, this picture shows all the classifications based on the anatomical and paleocerebellum and functional cerebellum. All the three classifications given in these pictures. So from the first onwards, phylogenetically again archicerebellum, paleocerebellum, neocerebellum, and vestibulocerebellum, spinocerebellum, and pontocerebellum. Classification by the efferent connections, vermis and paravermal region, cerebellar hemisphere. The right side top is archicerebellum, nodules are there 3, 1 to 3, and paleocerebellum, neocerebellum. And the right bottom is divided into spinocerebellum, pontocerebellum, and vestibulocerebellum. Now, histologically, this cerebellum divides into four major structures are known as surface and outer cerebellar cortex, and inner part and deeper part. The surface, also known as laminae or folia, and outer cerebellar cortex also will be present next to this surface, and inner white matter and deep structures called deep cerebellar nuclei. This picture shows the histologically the specialized cells are present in the cerebellum. In the outer layer are outer stellate nucleus and Purkinje cell nucleus, and the middle layer will have the Golgi cell, granule cells, and glomerular cells. And the deep layers which carries the information from these layers into the next layer. That is through the afferent fiber, which will have the climbing fiber and Mosaic fiber. Both will receive the input from the Golgi cells, granule cells, and glomerular cells. And efferent fibers, that is the axons of the Purkinje cells, will receive the input from basket cells and collateral cells, recurrent collateral. So both fibers as afferent as well as efferent receive the input from the cerebellum and gives to the cerebellar cortex. Now coming to the cerebellar cortex, there are three layers: molecular layer, Purkinje cell layer, granular layer. The first one or outermost layer called molecular layer, which consists of cellate cell and basket cells. Then middle one is a Purkinje cell layer. And the third one is a granular layer. The further granular layer consists of granular cells and Golgi cells. And this is a microscopic structure of the cerebellar cortex, which shows the Purkinje cell layer, granular layer, molecular layer, and white matter, that is the myelinated fiber. And these pictures again will give the information to us as the afferents are Mosaic fiber and climbing fiber. Efferents are axons of the Purkinje cells, and granule cells are excitatory neurotransmitter glutamate in nature, which will secrete, that is a granule cells are excitatory, will secrete the glutamate, and stellate cell, basket cells, Golgi cells, Purkinje cells all together inhibitory in action, which will secrete the GABA, gamma-aminobutyric acid. And cerebellar circuit from the outer motor cortex, input to the cerebellum through the Purkinje cell is excitatory, and output of the Purkinje cell is inhibitory to the deep nuclei and vestibular nuclei. You can see the top one is coming from the impulse, coming from the motor cortex, ending into the or entering into the cerebellum through the Purkinje cell, which will be excitatory, and further from the output of the Purkinje cell is inhibitory to the deep nuclei and the vestibular nucleus. Output to the deep nuclei is excitatory. And this pictures again shows that arrangements of the pathway of cerebellum. Again from the lower part, from the middle green color line, which is carries the input from the inferior alveolar nucleus to the deep cerebellar nuclei, and then to the Purkinje cell layer, and then to the parallel to the all the fibers of the molecular layer. And the first one with the pink color, that is the deep cerebellar nuclei, sending the output from the molecular layer, then into the Purkinje cell layer, and then to the deep cerebellar nuclei. Then it goes to the thalamus, motor cortex. And again another input from the pantene nuclei, cerebral cortex, spinal cord, and vestibular system. The right third is the right one, that is entering into the cerebellum. That is input from the pantene nuclei, and that is nothing but cerebral cortex. And see, pantene nuclei arises from the cerebral cortex, and spinal cord, vestibular system give the input that goes to the synapse with the granule cells, and then into the Purkinje cell layer, and then into the molecular layer. Okay, so on these three layers receive the input from outside and send the output to the thalamus. Now, nucleus of the cerebellum. There are three major nucleus: nucleus of fastige and nucleus of interpositus. The nucleus interpositus further divides in nucleus of globusus and in nucleus of emboliformis. And the third one is nucleus of dentatus. Okay, so major three nuclei. One is divides into two. Again, connections of the cerebellum. As usual, I already told, from the pontine pons, the impulse, green color one, impulse enters into the cerebellum to the fastigious nuclei. And another input from the climbing fiber from the inferior olivary nucleus, that is the blue color one, enters through the middle cerebellar peduncle to the cerebellum. And from the sensation from the proprioceptive information from the spinocerebellar tract carried by the Mosaic fiber enters into the inferior, enters into the cerebellum via inferior cerebellar peduncle. And the pontine impulses from the pontine carried by Mosaic fiber through the superior cerebellar peduncle, and as well as the corticopontine fibers, which will synapse with the pons, which will communicate to the cerebellum. Now, see this right hand side, the biggest the part is a extension called cerebellum. Within this, you can see the nucleus, dentate nucleus, interposed nucleus, fastigious nucleus. Okay. Okay, then now coming to the individual part, vestibulocerebellum or flagellonodular lobe, also known as archicerebellum. It is the oldest part developmentally, and it is responsible for the maintenance of equilibrium, integrate labyrinthine reflexes. Learning induced changes in the vestibulo-ocular reflex, that is, if it is affected, this part affected in the children or child tend to fall or reluctant to move, not able to move in the proper movements, and selective ablation abolishes and leads to the motion sickness. Connections of the vestibulocerebellum. So vestibulocerebellum receive the input from the otolith organ, semicircular canal, vestibule, then it goes to the vestibulocerebellum and the vestibular nucleus. And vestibular nucleus to the vestibulocerebellum and then vestibular nucleus. And output from the vestibular nucleus to the cranial nerve 3, 4, and 6. Okay, and to the spinal cord. Through the to the spinal cord via vestibulo ventrospinothalamic tract, and the nuclear fibers are rising from the starting from the vestibular nucleus into the cranial nerve 3, 4, and 6 through the medial geniculate body. Finally, all this together reaches the integrate labyrinthine reflexes. Now we are coming to the spinocerebellum, also called the paleocerebellum, developmentally next to the archicerebellum, and vermis, which controls the axial and proximal limb muscles, and it receives the proprioceptive impulses from the muscles as well as the copy of the motor plan from the motor cortex, and it brings about the smoothness and coordination of the voluntary movements, and it regulates the stretch reflexes and muscle tone. This is a major function of the spinocerebellum, which will receive the proprioceptive impulses and copy of the motor plan from the motor cortex. Yeah, and it brings the smoothness and coordination of the voluntary movement and regulates the stretch reflexes and muscle tone. This is the circuit or connections of the spinocerebellum, which will receive the non-sensory proprioception through the dorsal spinothalamic cortex. And proprioception from the 5th nerve, 9th nerve, 10th nerve. And tactile sensation through the nucleus of gracilis, nucleus of cuneatus. Visual auditory impulses, which will be conveyed through the dectum of the midbrain and goes to the spinocerebellum. From there, it goes to the reticular formation via cerebellar reticular fibers. Then it goes to the reticulospinal tract and enters into the spinal cord. And fibers receiving the spinocerebellum also goes to the cerebello-rubral fibers, red nucleus. Again, from the red nucleus, fibers communicate to the spinal cord. So the net result is it responsible for regulating the stretch reflexes, muscle tone, and coordination of the movements. The last one, neocerebellum, also called cerebrocerebellum, also known as cortico-pontocerebellum, which is recently developed, interact with the motor cortex in planning, programming, coordinating complex movements by the regulating the sequence and timing of movements. Okay, so functions of the neocerebellum, motor cortex in planning, programming, and coordinating complex movements by regulating the sequence of timing of movements. Connections of the neocerebellum are it connected between area 6 and 4 of the cerebral cortex, then to the neocerebellum and the red nucleus, from the neocerebellum to lateral ventricular nucleus of the thalamus, and as well as the motor cortex. And this is the infrastructure of the cerebellar cortex. From the cortex, impulse goes to the synapse of the thalamus and also to the red nucleus, and also tracks will goes down to the pyramidal tract. So from the descending tracks from the cortex, impulses synapse to the thalamus, then into the dentate nucleus. Dentate nucleus, hemispheric zone, and paravermal zone, vermal zone. So all these have the interconnected, and they are giving the output to the brainstem nuclei, reticulospinal tract, vestibulospinal tract, and rubrospinal tract, and vice versa. And vermis give the output to the Purkinje cell and then into the deep cerebellar nuclei, which is further synapse with the fastigious nuclei, which will again communicate to the reticular nuclei, then into the where the brainstem is located. From there, it goes to the reticulospinal tract and vestibulospinal tract. This is the schematic pictures of the cerebellum along with the midbrain, shows the all parts of the cerebellum. And now we are coming to the functions of the cerebellum. Vestibular cerebellum is responsible for the maintenance of muscle tone, maintenance of posture and equilibrium. See the lady now able to stand in the one limb and able to adjust the another limb. That is like wearing shoes. Okay, without supporting the body to any other places. Just holding the body, whole body holding the one leg and another leg raising and adjusting the things. That is a maintenance of muscle tone and maintenance of posture with the equilibrium. Spinocerebellum will helps in the error correction, smoothness, and coordination of the voluntary movements. Cerebrocerebellum, which helps in the planning and programming of the movements, coordinate the complex movements, and also sequence of movements and timing movements, extramotor predictive functions. All these functions are achieved by the presence of the different parts of the cerebellum. The cerebellum helps finally it helps to provide the smooth and coordinated body movements. Cerebellum and learning. How it helps in the learning? During learning process, cerebellum involved. Example, cycling and walking, etc. Afterwards, only cerebellum does the job. So the role of cerebellum, only cerebellum will helps the learning process. And cerebellar learning spares the cerebral cortex. And this is the one of the learning methods, music training and the brain. With the help of cerebellum, cerebral cortex can perform. And effects of cerebellar lesion. Seen on the same side, no sensory loss, no true motor paralysis, intellect not impaired, symptoms due to the disturbances of the tone, posture, equilibrium, and coordination of the voluntary movements. Signs of the cerebellar lesion: asynergia, asthenia, internal tremor or intentional tremor, that is a at rest, no tremor. When attempt to do something, tremor will appear in the cerebellar lesion. Dystachokinesia, dysmetria, decomposition of the movements, deviation of the eyes, slurred or scanning or staccato speech, gait, drunken gait, hypotonia, pendular knee jerk, rebound phenomenon, vertigo, and nystagmus. Asynergia is a coordination of the voluntary movement. And test to find out the asynergia or finger nose test and finger to finger test. You can see the picture how to perform the finger nose test and heel knee test. This is a finger to finger test. Second one, the first one is a finger nose test. Touching the our object, touching the subject's nose with a closed eye, and this is a finger to finger without overshoot. If the two fingers are touched properly, the cerebellum function is normal. And asynergia, heel shine test, just rubbing the one leg with another nail. And asthenia, muscular weakness, slowness, and easy fatigability. Ataxia, it is a motor deficit defect in the coordination due to the errors in the rate and range, force, and direction of the movements. If it is ataxia, manifests in the following forms: intention tremor, writing on buttoning, appearance of the oscillatory movement. See the while writing on the paper, there will be a oscillation, and this will be absent during rest, during voluntary movements, and these movements that oscillation will be absent during the rest. Dysdiadochokinesia, inability to perform the alternative movements. Okay, if the person is not normal with the cerebellar lesion, alternative movements not possible. And dysmetria, undershooting or overshooting, when failure to determine the movements at the proper timing, resulting in the understanding or overshooting. Sorry, undershooting or overshooting. Decomposition of the movements, complex action involving the more than one joint is split into its component parts. Deviation of the eyes, conjugate movements of the eyes towards the sound side. Speech, slurred or scanning speech, staccato speech, speech due to the scanning speech is due to the dysarthria. And gait, walking on a straight line is possible with the normal person and is not possible in the drunken gait, because drunken gait in case of cerebellar lesion, wide based, staggering, reeling towards the side of the lesion. Walking pattern will be altered. Hypotonia, reduction in the muscle tone, pendular knee jerk, deep reflexes shows the pendular response, and rebound phenomenon, inability to put a brake on the movement. Okay, for example, while pronouncing, while doing any work, not able to stop in between. Vertigo, dizziness will be there. Nystagmus, Charcot's triad, jerky movements of the eyeball towards the side of lesion. And cerebellar function test are finger nose test, finger to finger test, diadochokinesia, heel test, and walking on straight line, writing and buttoning. Thank you very much. அப்பா வாங்கப்பா.